How cool, brothers and sisters. Welcome to AquaBrain TV. On this installment, we catch back up with Miles Nowlin and we chat the collective struggle. Coming to us from Puerto Rico. You can check Miles out on his Kickstarter page and Facebook. Miles.
How are you, Andy?
I'm hanging in there, man. Pretty good. So you're in Puerto Rico right now?
Yes.
Whereabouts in Puerto Rico?
I'm in San Juan. I'm at a little restaurant getting some dinner.
Is that the capital?
Santurce. Yeah, I'm staying in Santurce, which is, it's in the capital city, San Juan, the biggest city in Puerto Rico. Not far from the neighborhoods where I'm doing my thesis research.
So the thesis, so you set up a Kickstarter and there's going to be a link. So check out his Kickstarter, and he's got his thesis. It's your thesis project, correct?
Yeah, it's my graduate master's thesis and for the Latin American Studies program at University of New Mexico.
Okay, cool. Well, can you explain what your thesis is?
Okay. In a nutshell, I am down here to collect stories from people who participated in a multi-generational social movement struggle over decades, generations, to protect a group of neighborhoods that were working class and poor people, some immigrants, but a lot mostly of family members who had settled there in the 30s and 40s, arriving from the countryside. So it's called El Caño, Martín, Peña. It's 8 neighborhoods. There's about 30,000 people that live there. And it's a traditional informal settlement. Historically, people, like I said, arrived there from the countryside in the 30s and 40s due to displacement through hurricanes. A couple of hurricanes happened, plus industry was shifting towards industrialization during World War II. And there was mass migrations of peasants to the city who basically built homes along this canal, El Caño. And today, many of the houses are untitled, like they don't have legal status, titling with the state. And many of the neighborhoods are, well, for decades, really since the 70s, have been pushed out through processes of urban renewal, and most recently gentrification, due to market pressures, external market pressures coming in and buying up properties and developing waterfronts, etc. So anyways, in the 90s, 30,000 people were actually displaced from the neighborhood. The neighborhoods originally was 60,000 people. Now it's 30,000 people. So they got together. I thought the same
drastic
thing. Yeah, basically an entire section of the city, really the heart of the working class of the city, surrounded on the west and the south sides by the business districts of San Juan. And so in the late 90s, people started organizing between the 8 communities, and they formed a community network called the G8, the Grupo de Ocho Comunidades, the group of 8 communities, and thus began to work with some outside community organizers, Livia Rodriguez and Alejandro Cote, who and a few others, lawyers and students from the University of Puerto Rico, many of them who were studying social work, to fight for a community land trust to protect and preserve the thousands of families that lived in these neighborhoods. Not to mention that the neighborhoods are known for flooding, perpetual flooding, and also water contamination, because every time the water floods, the Caño, the canal, is all contaminated, and the kids have to walk to and from school in flooded waters. And this has been going on for decades and decades.
Yeah, I noticed, I mean to jump in here. I noticed you posted something about the canal, and
Right.
it used to be just pristine. And
Yes.
so now that flooding, right, is carrying with it a lot of contaminated water as well. Not only sewage from whatever's in the cities, but also just other chemicals and stuff, correct?
Yeah, in fact, the flooding, a lot of it comes from the external in financial districts that haven't improved their drainage, and by default, it just goes downhill into the drainage of the canal area, which are these 8 neighborhoods. So anyways, the land trust protects 200 acres with approximately 2,000 families, and is in charge of relocating hundreds and hundreds of homes to new homes or renovated homes on community land trust land during what's going to be the dredging of the canal and the improvement of the infrastructure, which has been the community-based or participatory planning project in the works for the last 18 years, and an uphill battle on like a big community fight with and against the state of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
So are they pretty close then to getting that?
Yeah, they actually did get granted, I believe, 130 million, or in the January, or maybe it was I'm not going to say a number, but it was $200 million to finish, to actually put the cap on the budget and fulfill the budget to actually do the entire project.
Wow.
Aside from some dollars that still need to be garnered from the city for these home relocations.
Sure.
It's very complicated. I know I probably said a lot and probably need to backstep a bit, but point in case, the community is in control of the land. The land is in a trust, so it can't be bought by outside investors ever.
That's great.
And my project is looking at the community organizing that's happened across generations through collective practice, collective struggle, which has a broad kind of term to it, but essentially is the value systems and the just ways of being collective versus what the status quo typically follows in U.S. capitalism as individualism, right? Anyways, looking at that through story, through talking to people, through meeting elders, through meeting youth who've been brought up through the youth empowerment leadership programs and become leaders of their own communities, preparing themselves to take over the roles of community leaders, activists, and educators as well, because education is a key, part of this this organizing strategy.
So you're raising money. What would you use that money for? Like, I mean, obviously everything costs money, right? So what do you use it for? But what's your main push?
Well, the money is for me to be here and to be doing the work, doing the research, which encompasses a certain amount of equipment and materials. I am capturing film. I'm capturing the stories on video, and so there was some upgrades that I needed in that world. But travel, places to stay. as well as stipends for the people who I'm interviewing to compensate them for their time.
That's great.
But
Yeah,
and other than that, I did receive a grant from this organization called the Conference of Latin American Geographers. So I did
Okay.
I did get a grant, and I got a grant from the University of New Mexico also.
Wow.
And
cool.
then, but I was still shy, about $1,000 in my budget because it's expensive to travel these days
sure.
and do this kind of a project, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
And I've got a camera. I've borrowed cameras and tripods and microphones, and I'm like moving around, interviewing people wherever. Basically, I interviewed a lady in a park the other day. It was pretty awesome.
I know we
so
talked.
Yeah, it's an interesting project. Yeah,
I know we talked in an earlier chat that you wanted to make a documentary. Is this kind of the steps towards that? Like, are you trying to put a little mini doc together through this?
Yeah. So I originally, I do want to make a film at some point. I originally was thinking of incorporating that into my thesis project, and then I realized how much work writing a thesis is, and that I really would like to graduate and go back to being a normal person that's not, entrenched by graduate school studies and stuff.
I want to encourage you to create a short film out of your thesis, because they have film festivals, and this, I know like kind of I know it's a comfort zone thing, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to work on this project because I know it, I've got direction. But I think you're going to find that with a little voiceover, you could tie things together and put out pretty good little mini doc for these short film festivals.
Yeah, no, you're right, I think. And the reason I did the video originally is because I wanted to make a oral histories archive for the community to say thank you and to give, something back for what they're giving me, which is all of this amazing stories that I can, learn about and write about and theorize about and share with other people. Hopefully people will read it.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the point when you read it, you're reading it, but seeing that video, you can connect with, and there's an organic element, right? And obviously, like, and being a film student, film school student, part of that is like creating reality, right? That's like a big part of filmmaking. And so I can see how, like, well, if I write it down, then that will be, more true to what it is. So it's hard to say that documentary would be more authentic or more organic, because then you have that element of like, oh, well, it was staged and this was, so
it's not, it wasn't staged though. They're just interviews, talking to people,
which is something I think would really show through.
And
be powerful.
Well, and what you're saying is, I think, is true. And maybe, I'll say it this way, that like video production is a format of storytelling that's accessible by everybody. Not just a select few or a group of academic people or whatever. And that's super powerful. And it's film, it's beautiful, it's captures your attention, it's art, right? And so anyways, the archive will be made. There's options to down the road, like acquire some funding to make a short film, which I think is like definitely in the works. I'll say that, as far as like conversations about trying to do that after school, or make what they call a story map, which is like an online map, digital. You like click on different neighborhoods and we'll zoom in inside of those windows, you can listen to interviews, read about oral histories, maybe get some background of the histories from the, early part of the century when the peasants were arriving in the Caño, right? And to do something like that, which I think could be really neat too. But fundamentally, it's for the community. They'll have access to the interviews, and they'll be edited a little bit. I have 2 cameras here and backing up sound and trying not to make errors and all that. And then they can decide. And if at some point we want to make a film, we ask them to be involved too, because this is their grassroots, project.
That's great. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. What are you finding as a common thread through the interviews that you've already conducted, or the chats?
Great question. Yeah, no, totally. That's a great question, because I'm actually almost done here. I've been here for 12 days, I think, and I've done 10 interviews. And so there's just a lot swirling through my head, right, about like everything that I've heard thus far. But I'm looking a lot. I decided to look a lot at youth and youth empowerment, and particularly this form of popular education that is theorized around this scholar Paulo Freire, particularly, and others too, like locally here in Puerto Rico, but to teach kids how to think critically and think about their own situations growing up in poor Puerto Rican neighborhoods where, there's economic imbalances and police brutality and criminalization of people's, young people's growing up in the barrios here. So those programs start at 8 years old, and they bring the kids up through these workshops where they think about stereotypes of boys growing up in the barrios and write hip hop songs, or write newspaper articles for the local newspaper, or letters to Congress, or whatever practice that can get them thinking like engaged activists and citizens, so that they can be prepared essentially to take over the social movement in their own neighborhoods, fighting for the same cause that's going to continue going on, because the reality is that all Puerto Ricans, especially working class and poor Puerto Ricans, are suffering because of the colonial relationship with the United States. And this is a battle, not just between the neighborhood and the city, but like the whole,
country.
the swell of the colonial powers that have, really been harmful, extremely harmful to families for generations in Puerto Rico, right? So, yeah, training the future, and that's where it's this intergenerational collective struggle is what I'm framing it as.
Okay, yeah, and that brings me to a point and a question. When you brought up that you were interviewing the youth, how
well, I'm not interviewing youth. I'm interviewing young adults that grew up and learned through these youth programs and are now leaders themselves. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
that was good clarification. So I'm wondering, because in the United States, our ancestors were sold this, hey, move off the farm thing, move into the cities. You only just need to learn one job and we'll take care of you. And you can get everything in the city, and you don't need to be that. I mean, the old family farm, right, used to do so much just right in their own community, right? They got everything taken care of. So are you finding that these young adults are being really pressured to move out of their communities, or are they let's see if I can find a question here. Are they embracing the challenge of continuing this community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a struggle. I think some of them are and some of them aren't, and that's accepted as just reality. The reality is too that a lot of young people move and are actually recruited to come to the United States through programs like the what is it? Was it FEMA? I think was paying people after Hurricane Maria to come to the United States. So yeah, there's that. There's the diaspora of thousands of people that have left Puerto Rico in the last 12 years, a lot of them young people. And there's just a lack of engagement in community stuff, right? Some people just aren't going to be involved. And then there's these other students who were, again, kind of like brought in at an early age through a couple of these programs that develop their characters as leaders of their own kind of like struggle, right? And a lot of those folks work for the land trust in different capacities. Some of them serve on the board of the G8, the Grupo de Ocho. One of them does, and then they also have their own governance system. They're called LIHAS, Young Leaders in Action. They have their own board of youth, which is really cool. And that they have a president, secretary, and make decisions by voting, etc. However, they're more horizontal than the adults, which I think is interesting. The adults have a more hierarchy system. The kids, not kids, youth, young adults, they have more of a horizontal, more like, you know what I'm saying.
So they're outside. They've kind of flattened the pyramid a little bit.
Yes, and I think they're more radical. Personally, is what I'm going to find, that because they're taught to, again, think critically about their position in the oppressive system and the colonial system, growing up from age 8 to like adulthood. You know, writing hip hop songs about, you know, the flooding and that they have to walk through, the shit water that they have to walk through to go to school, and you know, these kinds of scenarios. It's creating this new generation of leaders that obviously think differently and have been trained to think a little bit differently than the elders. Not that the elders don't also have critical thinking skills and history there, but the youth have been trained in this way as in an organized fashion.
So I'm wondering if they realize how unique of an opportunity that they do have, though, living in this
the young people or the adults?
or just the whole community itself, right? I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it seems like it's kind of a unique opportunity of maybe aside from another neighborhood in Puerto Rico that's not part of it.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of really strong components about it. I also think that there's real life struggles, and that's what they're organized against, is this everyday struggle that is there. But you're right, as far as like the young people, especially, it's an interesting thing that I've discovered is they kind of hook them into sports. And so there's all these sports programs and basketball tournaments that happen on the weekends. And the kids can be on these teams, but they have to participate in these workshops. And again, these workshops are about like personal reflection of violence and criminalization and like external, like economic, you know, factors that are like keeping them down, and how to kind of work together, be leaders, and move through that, and educate your neighbors, particularly because they train them how to be trainers of like other youth, right? And then get to do the sports at the same time, right? Get to like be on the basketball team and you know, do hip hop programs and, you know, art expressive. They do a lot of painting, mural painting, and you know, different forms of art, public art.
So
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit out of, I don't know if you've stumbled into this at all, but are there free trade zones in Puerto Rico?
What do you mean?
Like where a company will basically have their own government in a certain thing of land, basically, where they like, okay, well, it's kind of outside of the law and we can pay our workers a certain amount of money. And it's usually a little bit above, say, what even a doctor would make. So it's like, it's more, and maybe that's not happening a lot in Puerto Rico. Is that something that you've?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't know about that, but I do know that there's a law that was passed recently. I can't remember what number it is, like 19 or 22 or something, that is an extension of tax credits and tax breaks that Puerto Rico has been giving to the wealthy for decades. This new one is basically a waiver of any capital gains tax or very, very low business tax. I'm not super hip to all the different terms of it, but it's basically this regurgitated tax relief, what do they call it, incentive to draw in private business from US and other countries to
that can't end well.
Develop in Puerto Rico, while here in San Juan, the sales tax is 11%. It's the highest.
Whoa.
Well, it might not be now, but a year ago, it was the highest. A year or two ago, it was the highest sales tax in all of the United States.
Yeah. I
so
think
you know how
here in Idaho, we're at like 6, I think.
Right. Which it makes no sense to have a sales tax at all. I think it's ridiculous because it disproportionately affects poor people. But
so
anyways, so tax havens for mostly these days, Bitcoin server broskies, gotcha. from Orange counties and wherever it's in Silicon Land, are arriving here to, ironically build giant servers that suck a ton of electricity on an island that, it basically imports all of its goods and services and most of its energy. So anyways, it's a complex, that's what's so interesting about Puerto Rico though, is that like it's a super complicated economic colonial situation with these amazing people who, work their asses off, are super creative and practices like, collective struggle with their neighbors in the case of, Caño Martín Peña. And there's cool experiments happening all over the city of collectives getting together and taking over space that's been abandoned by the government, because that's the reality. There's abandoned schools and
I was gonna ask if this community has inspired other communities to crop up.
The project has inspired other like similar informal settlements in cities in South Africa and in South America and Brazil, particularly.
Okay.
In Rio, I think. I think it's Rio. There's a program of organizers that work within the favelas, which are the historic informal settlements in Brazil. And they're getting like technical assistance from Caño Martín Peña Land Trust on how to do the same thing, because Caño Martín Peña Land Trust is the first community land trust to come out of an informal settlement in Latin America, the first ever.
That's huge.
Right. To think about how many community land trusts there are in the United States and Europe. And there's community land trusts now, forming basically because this one, was the first to do it. And now there's others. Obviously, there's other forms of collective land tenure and protection that are happening all over South America, and co-ops and collectives of different kinds. But specifically community land trust, it's the first informal settlement to design one.
So if people are interested in supporting you or finding out more about your progress, or finding out more about land trusts, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can just message me on Facebook. My name is Miles Nowlin. That's fine. And then I also have a Kickstarter page up, which even after the fundraising is done, the Kickstarter page stays up, which has a summary of the project. And you can email me and I'll send you the final thesis if you're interested in reading it.
Awesome, Miles. Hey,
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on and chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks. That was fun.
Thanks for joining us on this installment of AquaBrainChats. Check us out at Brain Aqua. That's how you subscribe to Miles. That's how you subscribe to us. And this is a video we think you'll like. Till next time,